Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. As always, wherever in the world you're listening to us from, whatever platform you're listening to us on, thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode, whether you have just started joining us or you've been here since the beginning, as we are here on year 5. So greatly appreciate you guys checking this one out. And as I was talking to my guests before we started recording, this topic is such a lively one in so many coaching circles. And I love hearing the discussions or reading the discussions that take place about offensive design and more specifically how to maximize the players on your roster so that you're building an offense that suits their skill set. And for those who've been in the coaching game long enough, you know that you are making those changes maybe pretty frequently as guys or girls circle in and out of your program, and you have to really figure out how we're going to maximize this particular group that we have, run something on offense that's going to get us the most points. And then those guys or girls graduate. Now, we got to go through the whole process again. So that is what we are going to be discussing today, that concept of personnel-based offense and different types of offense you might run based on different personnel, ways that you can kind of build maybe one system from another, how to get players used to a new system if they were accustomed to a different one, all that good stuff. Of course, I am very happy to be joined by a guest, as I'm always joined by a guest. My particular guest, very excited as he has just taken on a new position in a new role, which is now assistant women's basketball coach out at Midland College. Very happy to be joined by Coach Cory Hill. Coach, I know you're busy and I know you got a lot going on, but thank you so much for being able to come on here and talk to us. I really appreciate it. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Coach. Thank you for having me.
Coach, as I just alluded to, I know that you just went through a professional shift. And so let's start with your basketball journey and your coaching journey and talk us through where this great game of basketball has taken you. And ultimately, how did you end up in this new position you're at Midland College?
Yeah, no. So, obviously been a bit, a lot like most coaches, grew up around the game. And after I graduated, I went to junior college, kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I was kind of helping out in some different programs, volunteering and stuff like that. But my first coaching job was actually middle school girls. I coached at a small private charter school in Peoria, Illinois. Quest Academy is what it was called. And I got the middle school girls job, and they really never had like a real program. And so it was kind of building from the ground up. And that's kind of where my journey started from, like a head coaching standpoint. Kind of took over there and, did some good things, was there for 2 years. And after my first year, I got approached by the boys coaches for the high school. They were looking for a JV head coach, and the seasons didn't overlap. And so I decided to take on that role. So I was immediately the fall was the middle school season, and then kind of transitioned into the JV boys season. So that was kind of weird, going from, coaching 12, 13-year-old middle school girls to now I'm coaching 15 and 16-year-old high school guys. So
right.
Yeah, definitely an adjustment. But it was great experience. And so I did that for a year. And then the following year, I actually moved up and was the varsity boys assistant. And so helped out the varsity program. And obviously, most coaches know, even when you're doing the JV, you're kind of helping out, as a whole with the program. So was kind of there, had a lot of success at Quest. We played 1A basketball, which is the smallest classification in Illinois, and had a lot of success over the 4 or 5 year. I think I was there 5 years. We were like 85 and 16 or something like that. And so just a lot of success there. The guys the Jenkins family is the people that brought me in kind of as their own. And they kind of molded some of the character and the coaching, stuff that I learned throughout those years. So very thankful for those opportunities there. And then after that, I decided to kind of take some time off from school and try to figure out what I wanted to do. And so I worked a little bit, but ultimately ended up going back to school online and finishing my bachelor's. And then I ended up taking a job and moving out to Orlando in Florida. And so just picked up all my stuff and woke up one day and was like, I'm going to go ahead and move down to Florida. So I ended up taking a job with the National Basketball Academy, which is a organization that kind of is affiliated with the Orlando Magic down there in Orlando.
Oh,
And
nice.
they have like TNBA Houston. They're kind of with the Houston professional team out there, and they have a TNBA Ohio, and so they have a couple different TNBAs across the country. And I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity with the TNBA down in Orlando. Jack Lutzire is the guy that runs that and owns that. And so he kind of took me under his wing. Actually, ended up letting me live with him while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And he just really brought me in and taught me a lot. Taught me a lot about how to run camps. They do a lot of the youth program work with the Orlando Magic. So he was basically in charge of setting up the summer camps and doing all that good stuff. So got an opportunity to work really closely with him, and really taught me a lot about, just grinding and, just dealing with all sorts of different things, as I'm sure you can imagine. So
Yeah.
got a year to work under him, and then really was just really on fire to try to be motivated to go get a head high school job. And so I ended up taking a head coaching job at University Christian in Jacksonville. And so it was about a 2-hour drive, and kind of went up there and interviewed and got a teaching job to go with it. And I accepted my first, head varsity job at University Christian. So drove up there, kind of moved all my stuff again, and moved to a new place, and kind of sat down and got to work there, and really liked the culture there. It's a huge football school, but where I was able to do some things with the girls program there. I was there for 2 years. The both years we won a district title. The second year
Awesome.
the first year we went to the Elite Eight, and then the second year we actually went to the Final Four. And so had some success there. Got a chance to coach a couple players that are playing in college now. Got a chance to play against some real tough players out of the Florida area. And so some good experience there. And then, I felt that itch to kind of
Mm-hmm.
see maybe where the next thing was gonna to take me, and ended up getting a job at taking a job at Western Nebraska, Division I junior college in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, probably about 2 or 3 hours north of Denver. And so got an opportunity out there with Coach Isaac Liu, who was just going into his first year as a head coach. They just got off a run with Coach Gibney of making the Final Four for the National Junior College Association. So a lot of rich basketball history there.
Yeah.
Was able to come in and kind of assist Coach Liu in his first year, and had a lot of really solid players and had a pretty good year. I think we ended up finishing with 22 or 23 wins, and kind of continue that success. And but ultimately, I ended up, long story short, I ended up back in Jacksonville after my time at Western Nebraska. Kind of pulled me back to Jacksonville, and was doing some stuff with my AAU program, East Coast United. And I decided to, look for some college jobs, but at the same time, I was getting some calls for some of the high school jobs that were open in Jacksonville. And so I ended up taking a job at Tokoi Creek High School, which is in St. Johns County, just south of Jacksonville. And the school's only been open for 3 years. Pretty much a brand new school, probably 2,700 students, and kind of a really raw athletic program as a whole. Came in there, had a chance to coach a couple really good players, and we ended up with 21 wins, which was the most wins in school history. And had a couple girls break a couple, pretty awesome records there. So that was pretty cool to see. And definitely made it the furthest that they made it, and had a really good year. But again,
Awesome.
um,
The itch.
at, again, the journey always throws curveballs at you. I was in Louisville during some travel ball event during the live period, and got connected with one of my college coaching friends. And I told him, I said, man, I just really miss it. I really miss the full-time basketball and the recruiting and
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff. So long story short, again, I went through the process of interviewing and applying at Midland College, and I got offered a job. And so I'm getting ready in a couple of days to make that long drive out there and start working for Coach Ron Jones. So
Talk about some miles in your coaching journey. Just sort of just trying to put that on a map. That has taken up a lot of space in the country in terms of your travels. But what a cool journey and a cool story about going after positions that are good fits for you and going at it full force and putting all of yourself into it and having what sounds like a lot of great results come from it. And on a personal level, very cool that there's a Illinois connection as somebody who went to Illinois State University. To hear Peoria mentioned kind of got my ears up a little bit. So always cool to have a little
Normal,
local mention there.
yeah, Norma, Illinois. How about it?
Yeah, 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 absolutely. That's awesome, Coach. And with your experience in so many different positions, so many different areas of the country, you've had so many great opportunities, I imagine, to build relationships. And I know that that's something that's important to you. And I want to give you an idea. Excuse me, I want to give our audience an idea, especially because you are somebody who has coached a lot of different ages and levels as well. So you have a lot of different experience to draw from. Talk about your process of building relationships with players, and also how do you maintain those relationships through the inevitable ups and downs of a season?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the most important things when you're talking about building a relationship with anyone, not just players, but people in general, I think being your authentic self is very important because most people can kind of see through that. If you're trying to be fake or whatnot. But I think for me, when I'm first introduced to, I've been introduced to a couple new teams, in the past 5 or 6 years, been walking in on the first day and like, hey, here's your new coach. And
Yeah.
so, it's kind of overwhelming at times because you're like, well, I want them to like me and I want them to, respect me and all this stuff is running through your head. But I think the most important thing is to just show them your authentic self. And, I think always displaying your character, your true character is really important. I think it's also really important to show your players that you're there for them for more than just basketball. I think sometimes as coaches, we get lost in the winning and the ego and all this stuff that we forget that these are still people, and that we're here, for more than just basketball. We're here, obviously as you get more and more competitive up the ladder, people expect you to win. And but I think at the end of the day, this basketball coaching gig is a relationship business. And so relationships are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And is it has it always been a case where you kind of come in there and at the beginning when you say, "Hey, I'm the new coach," was the process of building that trust and having people buy in, and your experience having been in a lot of different stops along the way, is every team a little bit different in terms of their buy-in to you as a person? Has it been kind of the same in terms of the time frame or when they thought that they had bought into your vision? What was that buy-in process like?
Yeah, I think it's unique in each case. When you look back to my beginning of my journey, I was, introducing myself to, teenage middle school girls. And so that's a lot different than, how a teenage or, how a 19 or 20-year-old women's player at the college level might, interact with you as a coach. So it's definitely, different, unique experiences. I think, I remember, introducing myself at Western Nebraska. That was probably the most nervous I've ever been. Kind of, Coach Lou gave me a chance to kind of, talk to the team as a whole for the first time, and share some things about myself. And I was really nervous because,
Hmm.
as a new coach, you want them to like you. I was, I'm still fairly young, and so I don't have a ton of experience doing that kind of thing. But I definitely remember being very nervous, probably stumbling over my words a little bit. But I think in a way that actually, was me being my authentic self. I think they kind of saw it as like, hey, we're probably going to remember that for a while. Coach, looked like he was really nervous to talk to us, and they kind of thought it was funny. But in a way, that kind of even that small little interaction tied us together and, showed them that, I'm real and, I'm not, some robot and, I care about their feelings and their mental health and all the small things. I think that that's a big part of the relationship building too, is like, you have to help them understand that, you're there for them, not just, our job is to be basketball coaches, our job is to win and, be successful, but even the smallest of things, like, hey coach, I'm having trouble with one of my math classes. Like, is there any way, after practice, you can kind of like help me out a little bit on, just kind of go over some things, and just being there, like in the small moments, is just, it makes a really big impact on their life.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you bring up about the, that nervousness you mentioned and that idea that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's sometimes it's hard to do because, of course, as a coach, you want to come off with an air of confidence and understanding. You want to come off almost invincible and infallible, but I think that's also very difficult to maintain throughout the whole season if that
Sure.
isn't how you're feeling and if you actually are nervous. And as you mentioned, it's not your authentic self. And I think no matter how hard you try to project that level of like, oh, I know everything, I'm confident, I know exactly what I'm doing, there's going to be some cracks in that. And then things are going to get a little bit messy because players are going to see it. And then it's like, oh, like you're actually aren't as confident as you think you are. And all of a sudden you might kind of lose them because they know that you're trying to be something you aren't. So, if
Right.
you are nervous and you let them know, I think players are pretty forgiving about that.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you talk about personnel-based offense, let's talk about, and you have a lot of experience in a lot of different stops. What did you last currently run on offense when you were taking over a program, and what went into making that decision that this is what we need to be running to be successful?
Yeah, so my most recent head coaching job was at Cory Creek. As a high school varsity job, and I think one of the first things that I had to kind of do some digging on and kind of be aware of was, hey, let me get in here in an open gym setting and see them work out and do some open gyms, and that's one of the first things we did. I met the team and kind of got to know them a little bit, and I knew a couple of them because a couple of them played for my travel ball club, and so I knew a couple of the players, but a lot of the faces were new, and so I had to kind of wrap my mind around like, what is everybody good at? Because, they're, I think, as they get older, you start to realize, like, I think a lot of the skill development that we're missing is, it has to happen when they're younger. And so, oftentimes with some of these high school programs, you have kids that come in and, they've been playing basketball for what they say is a long time, but yet they still don't know how to do basic stuff. So, I think the first part is really just trying to narrow down, like, our top 7, 8 players. What are they really good at? What things can they do well? Are we really good at shooting? Are we, slow, but we pass well? Or, we're physical, we rebound well, but, we don't shoot it well. So, one of the first offenses I ran was the dribble drive. And I
Hmm.
kind of combined it with some sets. I was a big, I grew up in Peoria and a small farm town, and you basically knew who your players were going to be from when they were in first and second grade. You knew they were, as long as they didn't move, they were going to go to that high school, and so you could have some continuity with the middle school coaches. But so I like that idea of being able to have a system and run some sets, some half court sets, but really took a lot of pride in the 4 out. So it was like a 4 out dribble drive, 2 corners, 2 slots, and then someone kind of in that dunker spot, which, other people call short corner. We called it the dunker spot, but that short corner spot. So that's what I started with. And decided to try it. I went to some clinics, watched some clinics online, and watched a couple different coaches, do some things with it. And I decided to try it. And we just kind of committed to it in the summer, just every day, just doing some different things. In Florida, we pretty much get unlimited time with our girls in June. And so we basically just, utilized that, took advantage of that, and spent a lot of time kind of installing uh, I don't know if I'd call it system, but really just installing some of these key actions, if you will, or just really the philosophy that I was coming in with. Like, this is what we're going to do. Like, this is how we're going to play, and we're going to start basing our practices and our workouts off of this stuff. So um, that's kind of what we did.
So that was your 4-out system, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Dribble drive 4 out. Yeah, that's kind of what I call it. I know people call it different things, but
so for that to work effectively, what skill set did your players need to possess or have that a dribble driver, the 4-out was playing to their skill set? What did you see in their skill set that said, you know what, I know this is something we're able to do, and then that they're going to be able to execute it the right way?
it was actually a really good question because I didn't think hard enough about what our players were good at the time. I just kind of was selfish and like, hey, I've been studying this all spring and all. This is what I want to do, regardless of if we're ready for it. And so basically, at least from what I learned and what some other coaches taught me was you really have to have guards that have good ball handling skills, that have a quick first step that can break someone down off the dribble and get by them into the lane. You have to have some girls that can finish, some players that can finish around the basket, be tough down there, and then you just have to have really elite shooters. Driving into the lane, making the defense crash down. Obviously good passers, and then kids that can just knock down shots at a high clip. So those are really the two biggest things that I think give you an advantage with the dribble drive.
And so with that, what was the process of grasping it and being able to understand the mechanics of how it worked? Did you find that it was something they were able to hit the ground running with? Were there stumbling blocks? What was kind of that journey for the offense to gel to a point where you're like, okay, that we're where we want to be, and we're hitting our stride here?
Yeah, so we started small. We put in a couple of basic actions, some slot to slot actions, and then some slot to corner actions where we're making a pass, and then we call it a slice. Some people call it like a rub cut or like a butt cut. They call it a couple different things, but basically, just kind of cutting in front of the ball handler to kind of maybe distract or alter the way the defender is guarding the ball. And then really just getting as many gaps that you can create for the ball handler to get downhill and get into the lane. So one of the things that I quickly realized as we went throughout the season was as we played the teams that were, maybe similar to below average than us, like we had a lot of success. But as
Yeah.
we started to play the more disciplined teams that understood defense really well, we really had trouble because it didn't necessarily align to what we were good at. We had trouble with some of our girls being able to get by people off the bounce, which caused our offenses to stall. So we would at times, throughout the season, I didn't want to completely abandon it. So we combined it with, some of our sets. I'm a big horns set person. It also translates, I feel like, a lot to the college game. There's a lot of college teams that run similar sets. And so I feel like, for our girls that we're going to play at the next level, it helped prepare them, mentally for what they might see in high school. So, yeah.
I think that's kind of an interesting point that you bring up about the fact that you're kind of thinking about the game in a couple ways, right? Because you're coaching these high level athletes. So you're thinking about what's going to be putting them in a successful position here when they're in high school, but also kind of understanding that they have aspirations to play beyond high school. So you're thinking what's going to put them in a position where they're learning the game or understanding the way the game is going to be played at that level so that they're not just going to be successful for you in this particular high school year, but they're going to be able to see some success and kind of understand what they're going to be exposed to at the next level, which is kind of an interesting thing to balance, I think, as a coach.
Yeah, no, for sure it is. And we had a lot of different, levels of talent on our team. Our best player, our best player, she'll be a junior this year. She was she's being recruited at the mid-major level right now. So she's got a couple offers, all the way down to, we had kids play in the lineup last year that, probably will just be done after, they graduate. They're ready to move on. But we had a wide range of talent, which made a very diverse, skilled group. So that was nice. But at the end of the day, they were a really great group to coach, and I'll definitely, just talking about them makes me just miss them. I'm definitely going to miss them, and they know that it was a tough decision to leave the program, but they have a great group of girls that are gonna come back next year, and I'm sure whoever they bring in there will do a great job. So
Were your sets that you put in as you started to infuse some more sets throughout the year, how personnel driven were those decisions versus things that you just kind of conceptually believed in installing?
yeah, that's a great question. So one thing that I'm pretty high on as a coach is like the whole reason for this podcast is talking about personnel based offenses. And, we really took that into consideration, even with our sets. So we had last year, we had, 2 or 3 players that really should be taking, most of our shots. And so some coaches just roll the ball out there and say, hey, we got a bunch of athletes, like, go to town, go have fun, go, press, do all these crazy things and just play super fast pace. We combined, we were a really good transition team, but we combined our transition with our ability to execute in the half court. So, Audrey, who was, one of our better players, the one that's being recruited mid-major right now, she was a high level scorer. She averaged close to 20 a game. And so she was taking, well over 50% of our shots. And that's how it should be, in my opinion. Like I never want to tell a kid like, hey, you can't shoot if you're wide open. But I think sometimes we have to have realistic expectations. We had something in our program called green light shooting. And I got it from Coach Neighbors at Arkansas. He does this thing in his program where, they have to basically audition to have the green light in games. It's kind of like if we have a player that shoots 10% from 3 in practice, in a shooting drill, why on earth would we let them shoot in a game? And so I think sometimes people take it the wrong way, like, oh, coach never lets her shoot. It's like, yeah, we let her shoot plenty in practice and she shoots 10%. So we're not going to let her shoot in games. So we did, to answer your question, we did base a lot of our horn sets and a lot of the half court sets that we ran to get our better players in favorable situations to where they'd have a high percentage chance of scoring.
So to follow up on that, then, what are those conversations like with talking to players about, hey, like this is what is expected of you in terms of the workload. For us to be successful, you need to get up, X amount of shots or do X amount of things. How do you kind of broach that conversation where you kind of sit a player down and say like this is what we need from you, and how do those conversations, or how do they end up going, or are they well received, or the players feel up to that sort of challenge, or how do those conversations go?
Yeah, I think for someone like Audrey, she was excited, like, hey, the coach the coach wants me to take X amount of shots. Like, normally coaches are telling somebody that they shoot too much or whatever, but I think the harder conversations were with some of those players that maybe didn't have realistic expectations of their own abilities. And so we had some honest conversations from the very beginning, even when I took over the program, like, hey, we looked at your percentages and we looked at this and we looked at that. Like, if you want to be someone that we give a bunch of shots to, then you have to put in the work to prepare yourself to be able to make those shots in games. And so I think when you start to show especially really intelligent kids, when you start to show them some analytics behind their play, not to overwhelm them, but just to kind of show them where they're at, I think they start to realize like, hey, this is what I'm good at. We had a kid, our starting point guard last year, was a senior. We basically told her like, you could go the whole season and not shoot one shot, and you're going to start every game because you're our best rebounder and you're our best defender. And so I think just giving her confidence in the things that she's good at, making sure she understands her role. Now, funny enough, she actually did shoot, a decent amount in a couple of the bigger games, actually. And
Yeah.
one of our big of the year, she actually hit 2 threes, and she was like, she would even admit it. Like we always kind of, poke fun at her because her shot was just so weird looking. She had kind of that weird looking shot, but she was just a gamer. She knew when it was appropriate to take it, and she knew when it was probably appropriate to kind of just set it back up and not shoot it. So I think to answer your question, those are some tough conversations, but I think that goes back to the relationship building. That those weren't conversations that we had on day one. Those were conversations we had once relationships were built, once we had a summer together to really get to know one another and get to know our strengths and our weaknesses. And just having, honest and transparent conversations early on. I think those are pretty easy conversations to have once the season started.
And from what it is that you said too, a lot of these conversations, and in fact, all these conversations are data driven, where you have statistics and things to back it up, and it's not a case where you looked at one game or one practice and said, well, you can't shoot. I saw one practice and you're done. It's you had a lot to go off of, and in that way, I think for players, it helps it be a lot more of a factual based conversation versus them probably thinking that you're just picking on them or don't like them or something.
Yeah, we definitely gave everybody that thought they were a 3-point shooter. We definitely gave them all opportunities to run our green light shooting drill, and they knew what the number was that they had to get to have the green light. So if they didn't make it and they did really poorly, they knew they had the red light. And if they shot in a game, they better hope they make it, or else they're coming out. So
Or else, yeah, there'll be a consequence for that for sure.
yeah.
Awesome. So when you go through the process or have gone through the process in the past of changing offenses and changing things that you've run, um, what are some situations that you've been in where you are going from one system to another or making adjustments to one system and another and having to go through the process of getting players successful in a new system or a new type of offense when they were maybe familiar with doing something previously? What is that transition period like to kind of make sure those players can still be successful even when you're putting something new in?
Yeah, I think from what I've learned, the coaches that have had the most success with something like that are the ones that are really good teachers. I think everybody always says that coaches are teachers and, teachers are coaches or whatever they say. But I think that statement really is true. The coaches that are really good teachers are the ones that find the most success. And so I think, my key when I'm teaching our players, the game, I think it's, too many of our coaches, especially our youth coaches, just in my experience, spend a lot of time teaching, all these plays, teaching like, hey, you got to go here and you got to cut here and set this screen here. And it's like, I think we need to spend more time, or at least I spend a lot of time teaching my players how to play instead of teaching them specific plays, if that makes sense. So I think when you teach them specific plays, you teach them zone defense and like where to go on the floor. I think they just become really robotic. Instead of teaching them like, hey, this is the read. This is the read you're going to make based off of how the defense plays you. And so I think I find a lot of success early on teaching our players like this is how you play basketball. These are watch basketball. That's something that our girls didn't do a lot of. They didn't watch a lot of basketball. They would rather watch whatever else, TikTok for hours, and stuff like that. So just trying to change the culture of like, hey, let's learn how to play instead of necessarily having to be in one specific spot all the time, perfect, robotic people. So
And to that point, because I agree, that's something that I know I had to really get used to when I first started coaching, because I know I would make some assumptions about players' basketball knowledge, their understanding of the game, and maybe get a little bit frustrated or get a little stressed out because I thought we would be further along than we should have been, or I found that players, maybe knew how to run something very specific action but didn't understand the why behind something or couldn't adjust to being put into a new position, and so for a lesson I know that I learned was that, to really be successful, you really have to teach this game and also not really have any preconceived notions about what it is that your players know and just imagine like what if they just don't know anything or know very little and I'm going to kind of build them from the ground up. And I think if you kind of have that mindset that you're going to need to be teaching the game to them and there might not come to you with a lot of background knowledge, I think as a coach it can definitely reshape the way that you're coaching and the way that you approach things and hopefully make it a little bit less stressful because you already kind of know you have to do that much teaching going into it.
yeah, no, that's a great point. I agree.
When you are putting in an offense, and now it's preseason, and now you're building up to the season, and you're practice planning, and you're thinking about, okay, how are we going to use our practices here to get this offense where it is that we need to be? How do you go about practice planning in such a way where you are building your players' skill set so that they're ready to run the offense, and also paying attention to their individual skills as well, and making sure those are sharp so that they can run the offense correctly?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, ideas behind that is sometimes coaches miss it is that, they a lot of times coaches like, have you ever heard like when you're watching a youth basketball game, you'll always hear these coaches like box out, like go rebound, like box out. And if you go to their practices and they don't spend any time, rebounding drills, like they don't spend any time developing the skill of rebounding. And a lot of people say, well, rebounding is not a skill. And yeah, but helping the players understand what it is that they're supposed to be doing. Like it's kind of like, they walk into an algebra class and you tell them, solve for X, and it's like you've never taught them what steps to take in order to do that. It's similar in basketball. It works the same. And so I really believe it definitely takes a lot of planning. Like I said, I probably spent more time on my basketball practice plans than I did my teaching lesson plans. I can say that
I've been
now because
there.
job, but and it added up. I started to realize like, hey man, I really like the details of the basketball. And so for me, it's really all about starting small. Just like I do with my teaching, I scaffold my development, the development for the girls. We start with a lot of one-on-one. We build it up to 2-on-2, 3-on-3, and so forth. We do a lot of small-sided games. We teach, like we talked about earlier. I'll teach individual actions, with maybe 2-on-0. So like we called one of our actions swing slice. And so we'll swing it from one slot to another slot. And then the person that started with the ball, they'll slice in front of the ball handler to give the ball handler an open gap. And so we'll just start with 2-on-0 with no defense, just so they can kind of understand, the actions. And then eventually we'll add, maybe some 2-on-2 and start to do that stuff. I think that that's really important to kind of scaffold, if you will, like your development and instead of just walking into a practice and seeing, hey, we got a 5-on-5, like, hey, this is the play we're going to run. Like, it's just, I think that's where a lot of the coaches and, in my area where I was coaching is like, they're missing the mark. And that's why, I don't know how much you know about the basketball down in Florida. But when I moved down here, I was amazed by the athleticism that the
Yeah.
players had, way more so than what I was used to when I was up in Illinois. But the thing that the Midwest, or Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, all the just that area of the country, for me, they had such a higher IQ and they understood how to play the game. And so what I realized was either it's too cold in the winter, so all they got to do is go to the gym, where the people in Florida, we're going to the beach. I don't know what it is. Maybe it has to do some of that and also some of the coaching. And so, that's kind of where I start with my practices to help build the philosophy, is really just really break it down. And just like you said, don't walk in assuming that they know how to do all these things. Walk in understanding that if they have to solve for X, they probably don't know what that means. X has to be on a side by itself. And so, just breaking it down for them to where they can understand it.
Since you mentioned about the level of detail that you put in and the thought that goes into your practice planning, then I imagine, especially because of your background in education as well, that you also do a lot of reflection as to what happened during a practice, whether or not it was successful or not, and how to adjust and make some changes based on that. So I wanted to pick your brain on that, about when a practice is done, what is your process of thinking about, okay, this worked and we're going to continue to do this. We got to scrap this, got to tweak this. We got to spend more or less time on this. What is that reflection process like, about reflecting on the success and how effective a practice was?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the biggest things that coaches struggle with is like, I'm very detail oriented. So when I'm building my practice, I'm writing down minute by minute by minute exactly what we're going to do. And a lot of the times you find yourself where, hey, we were supposed to spend 8 minutes on this concept or this drill and it's running over, and you just keep taking more time. I believe that there's a positive and negative to that. Some people might think like, hey, if we're struggling with it, we need to spend more time on it. I'm kind of hit or miss with it. I think that if it's really important, I'll spend a little bit more time, but a majority of the time, I really try to stay perfectly with my practice plan because there's a lot of thought that goes into it, and so there's a method to the madness, right? Mm-hmm. So when I'm building these practice plans, there's a certain percentage of our practices that are spent on certain parts of the game. So one thing that I learned from one of my mentors, Tim Slater, he's coaching up. I think he's at Grayson in Georgia. He just won an award for like coach of the year. Like this dude's awesome. He knows his stuff. One of the things he taught me was start paying attention to what you're doing in practice. Start keeping a record, because before, I kept some of my practice plans, but I wasn't organized about it. After I kind of chatted with him and saw what worked for him, I started developing a system where I was plugging in numbers of, as far as like, keeping track of the minutes that we were spending working on a specific part of the game. So, if we spent, 8 minutes of practice today working on, help side defense, that goes into, our half court defense category. Or if we spent, 12 minutes in this drill and 6 minutes in this drill of transition offense, then I jot that down. And so, throughout the week, we would double check. I would go in and I would look and I would see like, hey, we spent this amount of time with rebounding. 2% of our practice time was spent on rebounding. And this week we got killed on the glass. And so a lot of the times it relates, it's very obvious, like, well, we need to increase the amount of time we're spending on our, the things that we're not good at. And so, I use rebounding is because we were a really poor rebounding team. And that's because, me as a coach, I didn't spend a lot of time with rebounding drills. And so it ended up being one of those self-reflection things where I was like, hey, going into this year, my plan was to be obviously back at the high school level. My plan was I need to pay more attention to what I'm spending our practice time on, because it's important. We only get them for so long. We got to make sure we're focused on, some of the things that we got to get better at.
Yeah, I love that idea of kind of breaking it down into percentages, like you said, because, the amount of time that you allocate towards something, right? If you're getting killed on something and you're only spending 5% of a practice on it, then, that gives you data to work off of. And at the same time, if you're spending 60% or 70% of your practice on something and you're still getting killed at it, then that probably tells you about maybe that time still isn't being used well, or it's not being taught or explained in a way or being practiced in a way that's actually benefiting your players. So, it can all be broken down into numbers. We love our analytics in coaching, don't we?
Yes, I do. Being a math teacher,
yeah,
I love it.
So and you mentioned, you alluded to this a little bit, and you can draw on this past year, previous year's experience. When you kind of hit that wall and maybe things offensively aren't working, the production isn't where you want them to be, what is that process for you as a coach when you're reflecting on, hey, we need to implement something new or overhaul what we're doing on offense versus we just need more practice and understanding and eventually is going to click? How do you go for that reflection on deciding which path to take, and what does that look like throughout your coaching career?
Yeah. So, I haven't had a ton of, I have had multiple experiences, but I haven't been a head coach at enough places to probably experience a bunch of situations where I felt like I had to switch offenses midseason. We have in the past, like in this past year, we had to utilize more sets. Like I was speaking, earlier, we had to utilize more sets, more so than the dribble drive, and vice versa, and and stuff like that. But I do strongly believe in consistency, and so I believe that it's important to research and prepare and plan, for what you have, so you don't have to make too many changes. The reason why we had to make a little bit of a change, when things got tough for us, was because I was so, you know, I was so stubborn about like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do the dribble drive. But we really didn't have enough girls that could break people down off the dribble. And we actually didn't have very many girls that could make a wide open shot. So, it's like we really didn't have the personnel the way that I would have liked to have run this system with. But it being high school basketball, you can kind of get away with some things. I do believe that if you select the right system based off of your personnel, they should be able to be successful with it. It is possible that, you're just you're just not teaching it well enough. I believe that most of the kids that play, at least that I've experienced, they want to do well. And so they're not coming into your program thinking, hey, I'm just going to make things really hard on Coach Hill because he's just the
Yeah.
worst. So it's like they're not trying to fail, or they're not trying to make things difficult for you. Sometimes you really have to have some self-reflection time, like you talk about, and really look at like, hey, maybe we need to make some small adjustments to the delivery of what I'm teaching. And oftentimes I had to do some self-reflection with teaching too, in education. I would get observed, and my boss would tell me like, hey, maybe think about using this delivery for this concept. And so, I think it's always important, as a leader and someone that is in charge of a program. I think it's definitely important to use some self-reflection. I do believe, like I said, if you do the personnel based system, you're basing your offense off of what you have. I do feel like you should, more times than not, find a decent amount of success as long as you're teaching it properly, and as long as the system matches up with the personnel. I didn't have the luxury of recruiting in high school, so in high school you get what you have, unless you're at like a prep school or something like that. But now that we're in college, now that I'm in college and coaching in college, we might have a little bit more say on who we're recruiting, the types of players, their skill set, stuff like that. So
And I think what you mentioned about, the way that you communicate something, and how you talked about if you do believe in something or know something works, maybe it's just the way the message is coming out or the way that it's being communicated. I think that leads to even further credence to the idea of like filming your practices and filming those skill training sessions, because maybe then you can pick up on, oh, this doesn't really make sense the way I was communicating it, or oh, I can look at their body language and see, oh, they don't really understand it yet. I think that there's so much power that can go in filming those practices, so that instead of just maybe being frustrated at your players because they're not executing it or you think they should be, maybe like you said, it's the way the message is being delivered. And I think filming your practice or your training sessions can lead to a lot of valuable insights specifically in that regard.
yeah, no, I agree. We in the past we've definitely taken some time to film. We don't film every practice, but we have taken some time to film specific practices. And we definitely, you mentioned film, we definitely spend a lot of our time, probably more so in our high school program than the average. We spend a lot of our time doing a lot of film breakdown. When I was at Western Nebraska, we spent a good amount of time, just meeting with the players in small groups or individually, just kind of self-reflecting, letting them, have a chance to really see themselves play. And, sometimes they realize like, hey, when you start to look at yourself play and do all these things, you start to realize like, have some really good self-reflection moments there.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. So you've been in this process, coach, of the season ends, players are moving on, you're having some returners, you're having some new people come in, and people's offensive roles and responsibilities are going to fluctuate and change from one year to the next. So when the end of the season comes and you're kind of planning and you're kind of thinking about what's coming up and who's returning and who might be new coming in, what is your process of kind of deciding, okay, this player is going to need to step up and take this role. I think this player is going to build on this skill set and be ready to do this next year. How do those conversations either go with your players, or how do you kind of self-reflect as you try and kind of forecast into the next year where you think people might be offensively and where as a team you might be offensively?
Yeah, I think one of the important parts about that is putting a plan in place. I think sometimes as coaches we forget that, it's okay to really step back and put a plan in place. My plan was, I wasn't intending on leaving my program. And so I already started putting a plan in place well before school even started, really right after the season ended, of like, hey, we're losing X, Y, and Z because they graduated, but we're gaining, X, Y, and Z, whatever. And so you start to look at the individual skills that they might already possess. And, we were fortunate. We were going to have a lot of returners. A lot of our main players were returners. And so, I think this is where having those relationships with those kids and being able to sit down before the season starts and saying, hey, like, one of the conversations I was going to have with Audrey was, hey, you're one of the best players in our county. You're not shooting enough shots and you're not getting enough free throws. We might look at a number like that, like, hey, you only shot, 4 free throws a game last year, and that's just not good enough. Like, that number needs to be 10 because of her ability to get to the basket and to draw contact. We have to use some of those, those small conversations to say, like, hey, can we start to build better habits? Like, don't fade away from the basket. Don't flop, like make contact with somebody. And so just understanding, like, hey, here's a plan, here's an individual plan for each person of what they need to do to help the bigger plan for the team kind of piece together. And so, like I said, I think that goes back to the ability to have, honest, transparent conversations with your players, because if they can understand where they're at, and they trust you, they understand that, you telling them that, like me telling Audrey that she doesn't shoot enough free throws. She didn't take it as like, man, coach, like I thought I was good last year. It's like, she understands that, like, I do compliment the kids, every once in a while, but she understands that, like, I have a plan for her. And I think that's one of the things that, the players that play for me appreciate the most is, like, I don't go in every day and just hope that the best is going to happen. I kind of am strategic, and I plan, some of the things before they happen. Like, if I know that I can get more out of a kid, I set up a plan in my mind, or I write it down, like, this is what I'm going to do to help this player succeed. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of my mindset behind it.
Well, I love that idea of having those conversations that you have with players about, as you kind of talked about, this is where you need to be. This is what you need to work on, and just eliminating a lot of that guesswork. And you have a plan in place of where you kind of see your players are going to be. But I think it's helpful for your players to know, like, hey, this is where I expect you to be. This is what you need to work on. This is what you need to do. And, don't have any mystery about it. So that way your players know, like, oh, okay, like, I trust my coach. And if he's saying that, or she's saying this is what I got to do, then I better work on this, because there's a reason why, he or she is saying this to me, because it's something that is going to be beneficial to the team in the long run. So having those conversations, I think, really can kind of set you on a good pace for the next year.
For sure.
So before we hit our concluding segment, I did want to ask this to you, because being an assistant coach now and having taken those roles as assistant coaches before, I wanted to ask you specifically about, in this idea of personnel-based offense, in this idea of um, making adjustments and monitoring based on the things that are out there on the court, what role do you see yourself as an assistant coach in this process of helping the head coach with? And where do you see your input being really valuable to a head coach, so that they have another set of eyes seeing what's going on? How would you say an assistant coach should be, and what their role is in kind of offering this kind of input and suggestion about things and how they're being run offensively?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think definitely something I've thought about a lot over the past couple weeks. But I think everybody, kind of all different types of people, would have different answers to this. I believe that my role as an assistant is to first have very open dialogue with the head coach of, like, I want my boss, my head coach of whoever I'm going to work for, I want him, much like the plan that I have for my players, I want him to have, a relative plan for me as an assistant, to be very open and honest about, the things that he needs me to do. And one of the things while I was interviewing and going through this process with Midland that I really appreciated about Coach Jones was he was very honest with what the experience was going to be like. He said, X, Y, and Z, these are my philosophies. This is what I believe in. And he's been, he has over 800 wins. I think he's been at Midland for like 18 years. And so he has a wealth of knowledge. And so when I interviewed for this position, one of the things that I was telling people was like, I want to go to a place where I feel like if I'm going to be an assistant, I need to go to a place where I feel like I can grow and that I can learn. Of course, I want to be able to bring the things that I know about, maybe some of the strengths that I have as a coach. I want to be able to bring those things and add value to the program that I'm coming to. But ultimately, those are some conversations that I feel like you have to have with your boss. Like, hey, Coach Jones, like, what do you need from me? These are the things that he already knows what I do well because I interviewed, but, and he's, had a chance to see some of my experiences, but, he's the one that's ultimately going to be telling me what I'm doing. So, I think for me as an assistant, the most important thing is loyalty. The players aren't always going to be like, man, I love everything Coach Jones says. It's just so insightful. Like, being realistic, I think we understand that at times the players can have some struggle with some of the things that are going on in the program. And I think having a sense of loyalty as an assistant is very important. A lot of the times, in my different places as assistant, the players would come back to me like, hey, Coach Cory, like what is he doing? Like, this is weird. Like, why are we doing this? And I think even in a moment where I might think that in the back of my mind, like, yeah, that is kind of weird, I think being able to deliver a message that speaks of loyalty to your head coach, I think that's very important. And I know that when I was a head coach, that's what I wanted out of my assistants. And so to kind of answer your question, I feel like it is a tough transition to go from, hey, I'm calling all the shots, like this is what we're going to do, to now I'm the one that, my boss is telling me what I need to do and stuff like that. But I'm really excited for this next opportunity. Coach Jones has been awesome through this whole process. He's been very honest, and I think we're going to work very well together. And I think we're going to have a big year this year.
Fantastic. No, that's well said. I think that's a great answer, Coach. And that point you mentioned about, that unity, right? And players know, and I've mentioned this in previous episodes with previous guests, and guests have mentioned this to me too, that players can sense when coaches don't get along or there's some sort of division between coaches. And if they sense that, they will try and pit them together and they will or pit them against each other and try and create drama or try to, have, oh, he said, she said sort of things. And it can get really messy really quickly. So to your point, right, even if you do think something is a bit strange or a bit odd, having that unified front and having players know that you can't pit coaches against each other really does go a long way.
Yeah, I agree.
To wrap up, Coach, a couple questions I ask every guest. To start with, thinking back on your coaching career, what is a specific moment from your coaching career that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
Yeah. So to be honest, I've done a little bit of research, on you and your podcast. So I'm not exactly sure, the clientele or the types of, coaches or listeners that you have. I'm sure it's very diverse, but I know that my first 2 years of head coaching was at University Christian. And one thing that I definitely walked away from there understanding that I messed up on was I allowed too much freedom. I wanted to be successful so badly because everywhere I was, they had such great leadership. They had such great history of success. I wasn't a part of too many programs that really, to be honest, that really struggled that much. And so I kind of just assumed that with the history that I've had, the knowledge that I had, we were just going to win. And I didn't really have to be worried about discipline. And the specific place that I went, University Christian, we had some players that were a little older and, juniors, seniors, and I kind of came in as the new guy. I was young and, I allowed the players to get away with a little bit too much. Nothing crazy. Nothing like too disrespectful, but really just, not laying down the line on a couple things, not I don't know the best way to put it, but my whole saying after that moment was, I'm never going to sacrifice my character and my beliefs and my morals to win a basketball game. And so I think that's really important, because when people think it's easy, but I did something that was really tough in the Final Four game. My last year at UC, we were in the Final Four game, and I had to do something with one of my better players, which caused her to be out of the game. I don't know if it would have changed the outcome of the game per se, but it's definitely one of those moments where people look at me like, they're kind of shaking their head like, I don't know, we really wanted to win that game. I don't know if I would have done that, and moving forward after that experience, I've had to make some tough calls where, last year, one of our starters, she had to sit the second half of a game because of something that she did at halftime. And so, when I was younger, I might not have had the courage or the knowledge or the experience to maybe make that decision. But like I said, I think that's one of the things I think about as a younger coach. I think that maybe they can learn from, the experiences that I had. Like, I think it's really important to never sacrifice your character or your philosophy or your culture just because you want to win a game.
And that is not something, as you mentioned, that comes easy. Though those are tough decisions. As you mentioned, you're going to get the blowback potentially, or people might question it. But as you mentioned too, right, you have to be able to go to sleep comfortable with the decisions that you made at the end of the day. And I appreciate you sharing it. There's a level of vulnerability to that, but also hopefully is inspiring to those listening that, like, hey, like, you got to go with what is right, and what is best for your program, because, right, to your point, you start letting some things slip or start letting things slide, it's almost like you have no standards at all as a program, and then maybe everything's thrown out the window, and you might be in a lot worse of a situation than if you had just kind of stood your ground like you really needed to that one time.
Yeah.
To wrap up, coach, there's what I call a 60-second soapbox. You can go over 60 seconds. I'm not going to time you or anything. But in that 60-second soapbox, it is your platform to get out kind of a final thought, a final message, a closing idea that you want to leave the listeners with. I kind of feel bad because you did such a good job with that moment you just shared. But hopefully you have something else that you can hop on your soapbox about. Feel free to take it any coaching or basketball related direction you want. It is your soapbox after all. So, Coach, I'm going to go ahead and give you the platform, give you the floor, and let you take it from here.
Sure. No, I appreciate it. And something I've actually been thinking about throughout the length of the interview was something that we really didn't have a lot of time to talk about. And it has been bothering me. So it's funny that you asked this. It's really good timing to kind of end this, the interview or the podcast. But one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, and I think it's different in the areas of the country, the areas of the world. I think there's better places probably, they have different mindsets. But one of the things that I've noticed through my coaching journey is there are too many youth coaches who have zero idea what they're doing. In my area specifically, in the Florida area as a whole, the ego that is involved with some of these adults is it's disgusting. Anywhere from really young, so first, second, third, fourth grade, you're at a travel ball game, you see it all the time, youth events, you see these parents, these coaches, these adults, just it's embarrassing. And so one of the things that bothers me as a professional, as a coach, as a teacher, are this basic question, right? Why are we spending so much time with our kids on teaching plays and teaching zone defense and teaching all of these elaborate offenses like Princeton and all these different concepts, right? When most of our kids can't do the fundamental skills that are going to help them be successful on the court. Some of the ones that I was thinking about, just fundamental skills that I think are really important that a lot of people can't do. Dribbling with both hands. I don't know how many youth players I see, and even kids that we're recruiting at the college level, like they really don't have strong hand, like both hands. And that just blows my mind. Like, making layups on both sides. I mean, I don't know how many high school players I'll see that won't do a left-handed layup on the left side. How many times I had to say that when we were building the culture in our program, like we had to tell some of our younger girls, like, hey, you're on the left side, like no one guarding you. Can you do a left-handed layup with your left hand? Dribbling with their head up. I don't know how many times I've watched an AAU game where I watched a guard that could be a lot better if she could just dribble with their head up. Passing off of 2 feet, finishing off of 2 feet, closing out properly. Stuff that, like, in my mind, I don't take for granted because they're a part of my everyday philosophy of teaching. Like, those things you have to be able to do in order to be successful in my program. I don't know how many youth practices I've gone to where I've seen, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th graders, and these coaches are teaching them how to play 2-3 zone, but they don't even know how to play man-to-man. Like, it just bothers me. Like, what? Like, the kids don't even know how to play basketball. They don't know how to close out. They don't know how to guard somebody one-on-one, footwork and where their hands are supposed to be, but yet we're teaching them how to play zone. So it's just bothers me, Coach.
Yeah, it's to that point. It makes me also want to say on the opposite coin, if you have good coaches, youth coaches who are willing to give up their time to the younger levels and they're doing it the right way, thank them, hold on to them as long as you can because they are pretty difficult to find.
Yes, absolutely.
Coach, I really appreciate you being able to come on and touch on it. I know that the time flew by, but coming on to talk about offense, personnel-based offense, your experience working with players in a practice setting, individual conversations you had with players, and a lot of other things that we were fortunate enough to be able to touch on. Really excited that you have this new exciting opportunity at Midland College. I know you're going to crush it and be ready, full steam ahead. So appreciate you being able to spend some time talking to us and go get it this coming year, Coach.
Coach, I appreciate your time as well. Hopefully you'll have me on again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.